Today we're going to talk about classical economics in an aggregate demand, aggregate supply framework. I have diagrammed the three possible states of the economy. A recessionary gap exists when short-run aggregate supply and aggregate demand intersect each other at some level less than long-run aggregate supply. Long-run equilibrium exists when aggregate demand and aggregate supply intersect at long-run aggregate supply. And an inflationary gap exists when aggregate demand and short-run aggregate supply intersect at some point beyond long-run aggregate supply. These are the three possible states of the economy. And now we're going to talk a little bit about what is going on when we're in a recession, long-run equilibrium and inflation, and then also under a classical model how the economy could be able to return to full employment or long-run equilibrium, which is the one that we desire to be at. First of all, in a recession, real GDP is less than real natural GDP. That's what long-run aggregate supply represents. It's the level of GDP necessary to keep us at the natural rate of unemployment. This means that unemployment is greater than the natural rate. We're not producing and buying enough goods and services to maintain the natural rate of unemployment. So instead of being at, say, a natural rate of 5%, we're at an unemployment rate of, say, 9%. And because we're in a recession, there's no inflationary pressure. In long-run equilibrium, now aggregate demand and aggregate supply are exactly equal to the amount of GDP necessary to keep us at the natural rate of unemployment. So if the natural rate of unemployment is 5%, we are at 5% unemployment. And finally, in an inflationary gap, now aggregate demand and aggregate supply are beyond the level of GDP necessary to keep us at full employment. So now what's happened is if the natural rate of unemployment is, say, 5%, we are now at 3% unemployment. Now the question becomes, how in the classical model can the economy fix itself? If you remember, classical economics was the very first theory about how the economy could be repaired when it became dislodged from equilibrium. And the key to classical economics is labor markets. If you look at both inflationary and recessionary periods, what you have is a case where unemployment is not equal to the natural rate. In long-run equilibrium, it's equal to the natural rate, and there's no pressure one way or the other. But let's say that we're in a recession. Now unemployment is at some level greater than the 5% unemployment rate. What this will then induce those out of work to do is to accept lower wages. As wages fall, short-run aggregate supply shifts to the right, and we return to full employment level GDP. If we have a recessionary period and wages are too low, now employees can bargain for higher wages. This drives up costs and causes short-run aggregate supply to shift to the left, and we return to full employment GDP at a slightly higher price level. So in both cases, the venue through which classical economics allows the economy to fix itself is the labor market. If wages and prices are flexible, then employees will either bargain for higher wages or be willing to accept lower wages, and that will allow supply to shift and return us to full employment. Next time we will criticize the classical view when we look at the Keynesian view. One thing that I would say in regards to the classical view is that the classical view is the historic view of how the economy was allowed to fix itself. And also the classical view is basically the idea of laissez-faire policy. The government shouldn't intervene in the economy.